Turns out the New Orleans Saints defense is exactly who we thought they could be coming into 2022, but unfortunately, looks like we found out too late. Or did we? We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credentialed member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Have you ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM or managing your own football franchise? If you have, well, then this mobile game is definitely for you. To download it and try it out yourself, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in your app stores. Our listeners are going to get a 100% free boost with their franchise by using the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. Tell you more about that game later. I want to focus on the New Orleans Saints game, winning in Philadelphia, the thing they have not been able to do over the course of the past two seasons. Again, as I pointed out in the postcast, granted, of course, this was without MVP caliber quarterback in Jalen Hurts. It was with Gardner Minshew, who did lead a pretty good offensive attack against a very good defense last week against the Dallas Cowboys. So, a little bit of give and take there. But nonetheless, the New Orleans Saints defense turned out to be exactly who we thought that they could be. They just sort of showed it to us a little bit too late. We'll talk about that. We'll also discuss a little bit of an update to the potential Payton picks that are out there this offseason. What is the New Orleans Saints asking price? And we'll also discuss some of the unheralded pieces that took a huge part in the Philadelphia Eagles, or the win over the Philadelphia Eagles. So let's start off here with that win. The New Orleans Saints are exactly who we thought they could be, or showed that the defense at least could be exactly who we thought that they could be coming into this 2022 season. It just seems like we found out too late, depending upon how you look at it. Look, the New Orleans Saints defense has been one of the top defenses in the NFL over this most recent stretch of games. Unfortunately, that defense will not get an opportunity to show what it can do in the postseason as the New Orleans Saints, thanks to a couple of early bad losses, as well as, of course, a blown lead against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers here recently, and a Minnesota Vikings loss on Sunday, will not be making the postseason. They are eliminated from the postseason. So the focus here is more so looking at what the New Orleans Saints defense has turned into toward the latter half of the season. They have allowed no more than 20 points over the course of the past 7 games, 13.6 points per game. That is as much as they've allowed over the course of the last 5 games. They held the NFL's best offense to just 10 points, held one of the NFL's best rushing attacks last week in the Cleveland Browns to less than 4 yards per carry, 11 sacks over the last 3 games. Their turnover margin over the course of the first 10 games was minus 12, but now over the last 6 has been a flat 0. So they're forcing turnovers just as much as they have been turning the ball over. Unfortunately, some of the turnovers have been knuckle-headed situations. And thus, this team has now won 3 in a row, could potentially close out the season with 4 in a row, and by winning 5 of the last 7, going 5-2 over the final stretch of games. So that's all big, right? And those are all things that have helped the New Orleans Saints win games here down the stretch. But what's the value now that the New Orleans Saints are no longer a part of the playoff competition, right? They're not in that conversation anymore. They are now mathematically eliminated from playoff contention. So we won't see it this year, but their offseason is now going to get better because of basic, or at least it's much better in terms of the outlook that it was 3 games ago. Let's say it that way. The team has shown that its winning culture can prevail over anything, over any struggles, injuries, things like that, head coaching changes, questionable play calling, questionable leadership, all of these things that maybe, you might want to point to and highlight. And now all of a sudden, this team has gone from having those question marks to being a potential free agency destination this offseason. Now, closing and finishing out the season strong against the Carolina Panthers will be important, but it's not going to be imperative, right? I mean, the New Orleans Saints are simply a team right now that have shown you all the resilience in the world, that have shown you all of the grit in the world, that have shown you all of the fight in the world. And that is the type of environment that NFL players want to be a part of. That is a winning culture. That is a winning, that's a winning program. That's the stuff that players want to be a part of. As I highlighted in the postcast, that type of attitude, that type of culture around your team is what brings free agents. It's what keeps in-house free agents in New Orleans. It's what forces the best out of draft prospects when they're doing interviews and workouts during the draft process, all of that. So there are so many different ways that a win against Philadelphia, kind of like in the same way that when you watch, let's say, nationally televised collegiate games, how wins against big programs fuel recruiting. That's not that different in the NFL. So with the New Orleans Saints showing you here that they're not a team that's willing to lay down and die, basically, when everything sort of looks stacked up against them, going up against the best team in the NFL, the best offense in the NFL at least, that means something. That means something to these players that are going to be looking for jobs next season, whether they're ones that are coming out of this program or looking to come into a new program, just to continue the college metaphor there. So while the New Orleans Saints won't get an opportunity in the postseason here to play, spoiler for a round or anything like that, the more important part is that this team has shown you its togetherness. And the other thing that this team has shown you is the influx of young talent that this roster is already made up of, and that the scouting department still does an excellent job going out and finding. Rasheed Shaheed, Juwan Johnson, Carl Granderson, who is a big-time difference maker. All of these guys, undrafted. Caden Ellis, 7th round selection. Alontae Taylor, no one was talking about him before the draft. Very few people were talking about him before the draft. These are the players that have stood up and made a massive difference for this New Orleans Saints team, are the ones that are going to be the building blocks for this team's future, because look at just how ridiculously good they are. So no, you're not going to get this isn't the type of victory that all of a sudden you get to ride off into the sunset, or that you're, taking this victory and building momentum into the playoffs. It's not a victory that you get to, really take a victory lap about, unless you're a fan. Like if you're a fan, then you take every victory lap that you can get, especially in a season like this, when maybe you expected the Saints to win double-digit games and they might win 8 this year. So, this isn't a Super Bowl win. This isn't even the New Orleans Saints Super Bowl, as as opposing team fan bases and things like that would say. It really is just a win that shows you the character of this roster and the character of this team. And that goes a long way when it comes to continuing to try to reload. We've discussed over the course of the past couple of weeks how easy it would be for the New Orleans Saints if they make the right decisions. And all of it is caveated with also making the right decisions on the coaching staff, right? So if they make the right decisions, they can reload this roster for 2023 and play and compete and potentially win in what's going to be just a crappy division all over again next year, with Tom Brady possibly not sticking around in Tampa. And even as you have seen the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this year, even if Tom Brady does stick around, how much does that really move the needle for you at this point, right? Or at least with that team. So, and with that coach. And so with all of that, the New Orleans Saints very much in control of their destiny, just not this season's destiny. Now you start to look at next season's destiny. But hey, one more win against the Carolina Panthers sure wouldn't hurt anything, especially if you're invested in the NFL draft and pushing that Philadelphia Eagles pick as far down the board as you can. But the New Orleans Saints, great win for them in Philadelphia, great win for them in Cleveland, great win for them against the Atlanta Falcons. They wanted to go 4-0 to close out the season. They've checked 3 boxes with 1 box left to check, and it would go a long way for the New Orleans Saints, even though we won't see the fruits of that labor immediately in the future, and improving their outlook for who they can be, and what they will be in 2023. Coming up next, speaking of, if you're watching the NFL draft boards, Payton picks. We know that there are potential for this season. So if the New Orleans Saints were to trade Sean Payton, we now know, or at least have an idea of what it is that the New Orleans Saints are asking for. Let's break that down and figure and discuss where they might be able to get it coming up next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. I love this partnership. I love this game. It's a mobile game. You just download it right on your phone, and it's called Ultimate Football GM. So if you've ever wanted to manage your own football franchise, or be your own NFL GM. Well, now you can be with Ultimate Football GM. And this game is 100% for you if you're tuning into this podcast, because you know how I get nerdy about the salary cap numbers and all that other stuff, free agency, the draft. That's exactly what you get to do with this game. You're hiring coaches and coordinators. You're hiring or you're trading players. You're signing free agents. You're manipulating the salary cap. You're drafting players. You're trading draft picks. You're upgrading facilities. You're doing all of the stuff that an NFL GM and in some cases owner would be doing. So that little itch that you've been trying to scratch with that other football game for years and years and years that doesn't care about you the way that you care about it, this football game cares about you the way that you care about it. So go and check it out today. And Locked On Saints listeners are going to be getting a 100% free bonus on their franchise by using the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's promo code Locked On, LOCKEDON, in all caps. So make sure that you check it out today. You can do so by visiting ultimate-footballgm.com or looking it up in your app store today. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. A big Sunday morning splash report. I'm messing up all my vowels today. I appreciate your patience with me. Sunday splash report this morning before the New Orleans Saints took on those Philadelphia Eagles and got that win in the city of brotherly love. The New Orleans Saints reportedly seeking a first-round pick for Sean Payton. Let's talk about why that's not all, but also what that could mean for the New Orleans Saints and where they could get it. We appreciate you so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Sports today as well for your second listen, so that you can pick up all of the news around the world of sports with the Locked On local experts, bringing it to you only the way that Locked On can. You can find it on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. So I got to get rid of this. Sorry, y'all. So when it comes to the New Orleans Saints and the way that their outlook is over the course of the 2023 offseason, a lot of it is dependent upon what happens with head coach Sean Payton. Does Sean Payton return to New Orleans? Unlikely. Does Sean Payton return with Tom Brady to New Orleans? We never say never, but also very unlikely. The most likely situation actually is that Sean Payton doesn't coach anywhere next season, right? You just look at the jobs that are open. Maybe there's nothing at this moment that feels like it appeals to him, but we know Sean Payton wants to go back to coaching. And we also know that, we know some of the jobs that are going to be open. The Houston Texans are probably going to have an opening. We know the Indianapolis Colts will. We know the Denver Broncos will. But there could be other teams that do if the Dallas Cowboys get bounced in the first round, if the Chargers get bounced in the first round, if there's some surprise retirement like what we saw with Bruce Arians last year, there will be those other teams that will open up. So what the New Orleans Saints are reportedly asking for, according to Adam Schefter, in a report connected to the Denver Broncos, who are expected to be, quote, ultra aggressive in pursuing their next head coach, with Sean Payton being their preferred target. The asking price that the New Orleans Saints are looking at are those akin to what guys like Bill Belichick in both of his trades from the Jets, from the Browns, all of that, as well as, of course, John Gruden got when they were moved by their team. So that's what the New Orleans Saints are looking at this. So the asking price that Adam Schefter spoke of is that the Saints will be asking for a first-round pick. But don't mistake that as meaning that the New Orleans Saints are only asking for a first-round pick. It's just simply the fact that the cornerstone of the trade will be a first-round pick. That's what the New Orleans Saints are going to be asking for. So it might be a first-round pick this year, a second-round pick this year, and a second-round pick next year, or a first-round pick this year, a first-round pick next year, and a second-round pick next year. Some conglomeration or grouping of picks, probably some money to help offset cost. All of those things are very likely going to change hands when it comes to this trade. And Mickey Loomis will be the one to orchestrate the trade. I know a lot of people like to, throw shade at that idea because of the way that C.J. Gardner-Johnson was traded, which, let's face it, C.J. Gardner-Johnson was effectively traded for a bag of peanuts, but you weren't going to get anything for him at all. So you knew you had to move him. Everyone knew you had to move him. Everyone knew that he wasn't going to be in New Orleans anymore. Everyone knew that New Orleans wasn't about to pay him, not at what he wanted to be paid at. So his value was incredibly low because it's not about the player, it's about the circumstance. This is a situation to where there is no circumstance. It's either you want the coach or you don't want the coach. And with all of the teams that we just discussed potentially having coach openings available, let's throw the Arizona Cardinals in there, and then, of course, other teams that could potentially get involved, like the Carolina Panthers, if they don't stick with Steve Wilks, although he's performed pretty well down the stretch, that price is just going to go up and up and up and up. So hopefully the New Orleans Saints will be able to get a bit of a haul back. But when it comes to the first round selection, there's a lot of teams where they can get that from. There are the aforementioned Los Angeles Chargers, as we've discussed, as a potential destination for Sean Payton before. There's the Arizona Cardinals too, but the Arizona Cardinals first round pick is going to be like a top 5 selection. So what's the likelihood of them trading a top 5 selection? It's very, very low. Houston Texans have an early first round selection thanks to the Cleveland Browns, but will also have a later first round selection. But is Sean Payton really going to be interested in going to Houston? And that's kind of where I am on the Denver tip too. There's a complete possibility that the New Orleans Saints could trade to Denver or could trade with Denver, because Denver does have a first round pick this year. I think people kind of forget the fact that they also still have the San Francisco pick from an earlier trade and think about them trading all of their first round picks in order to get Russell Wilson. But they actually still have a first round pick from San Francisco, which will probably be around 26, 27, 28. That's pretty close to what the Bucks gave up. It was pick 21 overall in order to get John Gruden. So then you start to look at the John Gruden trade in comparison and you think, okay, 2 first round picks, 2 second round picks, something in that neighborhood, you'd be really happy with that. So that's probably where the New Orleans Saints are going to start in that conversation, specifically with the Denver Broncos. And Sean might not want to go to Denver, right? I have not really heard that Denver is a place that's on his radar. There is a lot of interest coming out of Denver in terms of pursuing Sean Payton, but Sean Payton is going to have to want to coach there, right? So basically the way that this all works is that, let's say the Denver Broncos decide that they want to interview Sean Payton. They will get in touch with Mickey Loomis. They will work out trade compensation first. If the two teams can come to an agreement on the trade compensation, then New Orleans will grant permission for that team to then speak to Sean Payton, and then Sean Payton makes a decision about whether or not he wants to go there. And Mickey Loomis will honor whether it is that Sean Payton wants to go to that particular situation. And so it's a bit of a process. It's not one that's going to happen quickly, right? Like, we know that there are some things that are going to happen very, very quick, right? The last week of games is next weekend, and Monday you're going to see this coach fired, this coach leaving, that coach leaving. You're going to see all that stuff. But don't expect to see Sean Payton traded right off the bat, right? That's something that's going to take time, and then they're going to have to go through the entire process because there's a whole negotiation period that has to happen before Sean even speaks to the other team. So in terms of the teams where they can get the first round picks, that they'll be able to get the first round picks from, effectively any team that's looking for a coach has a first round pick that they're going to be able to offer. There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, everybody's got that first round pick of the teams that are going to be looking for head coaches over the offseason. The biggest exception are actually the teams that have the higher first round picks, because again, Arizona unlikely to give up a top 5, top 10 selection in order to bring in Sean Payton, right? In order to bring in any coach at that point. So that'll be the sort of big marker for what you're looking for. Do they have a first round pick, and is it too high? Seems to be a greater portion of the conversation than do they not have the first round pick. If they don't have the first round pick, they're not even probably a part of the conversation at that point, and rightfully so. Now, you want the Carolina Panthers to be involved. You want the Houston Texans to be involved. You want the even if Sean Payton's not interested, you want the Denver Broncos to be involved, because the more teams that are involved, Indianapolis Colts, you want them involved too. The more that those teams are involved, the higher the price becomes, the more aggressive the bidding war becomes. So that ends up being huge for the New Orleans Saints, potentially paying off whether it's this year or next year. But you certainly, or rather 2023 or 2024, but you certainly hope that the New Orleans Saints are going to be able to figure out something with Sean Payton that's going to allow them to improve either their coaching staff, which would mean returning Sean Payton, or their pick situation and being able to rebuild a little bit more, reload a little bit more, which would be trading Sean Payton this offseason. But again, as we've discussed, based upon what we've seen with this roster, the talent at the bottom of it, the competition of young talent competing with young talent, and of course, still having an early second round draft pick, the New Orleans Saints will be fine to reload over the course of this offseason. But just a quick update on where things stand with the Sean Payton asking price. Coming up next, the unheralded players that led to the New Orleans Saints victory in Philadelphia. We'll take a look at the guys that, of course, were the big-time standouts, but those that we aren't discussing enough, including wide receiver Rasheed Shaheed, whose name you just can't say enough. We got that coming up for you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Today's episode brought to you by Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar on the market. If you're looking for a delicious treat, but you don't want all the fat, you don't want all the calories, then you gotta try Built Bar. So you're getting through the holidays here. You're setting up all of your New Year's Eve resolutions and everything. Maybe you've got one where you want to get fit, you want to eat healthy, or maybe you just want to take it easy, you want to snack healthy. Built Bar will help you do that. You got to try Built Bar. It's healthy and it's actually tasty as well. Seriously, they're so delicious that you won't even think that they're good for you. Perfect for that New Year's resolution. They're covered in 100% chocolate. They've got some unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond, just for instance, as well as several others. And we're talking about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, but yet a whopping 17 grams of protein. You're not going to get that with any other protein bars out there. And now it's even easier to get a hold of Built Bars because you can find them, of course, over at built.com, but you can now also get them at your local Walmart and Sam's Clubs as well. If you head to your nearest Walmart today and then go over to the pharmacy section, you're going to be able to grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can get a 4-box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or the coconut puffs. You go to Sam's Club, you can get a 13-box of all their hit flavors like brownie batter and churro. You can thank me later. Make sure you can check them out your nearest Walmart or Sam's Club, or of course over at built.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints with the unheralded players that played a major role in the New Orleans Saints' big victory over the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, I'm just going to name a couple here. I'm going to acknowledge some of the big standout performances just to give us kind of a spectrum, if you will. But I'm going to name just a couple of these unheralded players. So if there are other players that you think deserve some credit, make sure you let me know as well. Would love to hear from you on this as well. So a couple of the players that were the big standouts that we know, deserve the acknowledgement. Cam Jordan, now the New Orleans Saints franchise all-time sack leader with 115.5 sacks. Now, don't get confused. If you Google it and you find and you try to Google like New Orleans Saints franchise sack leader, you're going to see a number 123 by Ricky Jackson. That is a Pro Football Reference number, where like they just like ultra nerded out and went out and dug up more sacks from before when the NFL started tracking sacks. So the official number begins when the NFL started tracking sacks, excuse me. So 115 was the official number. That was a Ricky Jackson. Hey, right here, Dome Patrol. That was a Ricky Jackson number. The New Orleans Saints record now belongs to Cam Jordan after a 3-sack performance on Sunday against the Philadelphia Eagles. Now sits at 115.5. Another, of course, big name that deserves a lot of credit, Marshon Lattimore, casually misses 10 games with a lacerated kidney, comes back only to walk in a pick 6 near the goal line on against the NFL's best offense. So, light work for Marshon Lattimore, who has always found success, by the way, against the Philadelphia Eagles. 4 career interceptions against the Philadelphia Eagles. That's the most interceptions in his career against an individual team. He's met the Eagles, and that includes the playoffs, but he's met the Eagles quite a few times. So, of course, he's had that number boosted in that way, but making the plays nonetheless. All right, so a couple of the unheralded guys that deserve a little bit of shine. Landon Young is definitely one of them, having to step in early for Ryan Ramczyk. The Saints were already down Andrus Peat. They were already down Cesar Ruiz, who's on injured reserve. Then they end up going down without being able to have Ryan Ramczyk out there. He got hurt earlier on in the game. We'll learn more about him all throughout the week and practice and all of that. But shout out to Landon Young for stepping in and performing, mostly well, the way that you would expect a backup right tackle to jump in against one of the NFL's best pass rushing teams. They have 6 or more sacks over the course of the past 5 games, an NFL record. They've got 4 different players with 10 or more sacks. Just incredible what they've done over on the pass rushing side. So shout out to Landon Young for coming in and Landon Young being in, Calvin Throckmorton being in, Josh Andrews being in, and this game not being a complete disaster on the offensive side. Although, again, 6 sacks is a lot to give up, but hey, the Saints got 6 sacks on their end as well. Speaking of getting 6 sacks, somebody else that deserves a little bit of shine is Shy Tuttle. Not necessarily because he didn't get a sack. He wasn't really, an impact player that you saw in the pass rush game, but the Philadelphia Eagles had gone for it 25 times on quarterback sneaks on like 3rd and short and 4th and short type situations, and had converted all but 2. That number is now 3 because the New Orleans Saints brought them to an absolute halt on a 4th and 1 attempt. And the New Orleans Saints end up forcing a turnover on downs on that play. And then, they end up being able to choose some more off the clock. They didn't end up putting the ball in the end zone during that play or anything like that. But it's a massive stop for them and just a big statement moment. And the way that they played it was super smart. It was kind of a rugby situation was what the Philadelphia Eagles were going for. That's one of those like scheme over team type situations to where like it's just a good scheme and it tends to work. And what they try to do is snap the ball and then get a push behind the quarterback with two backs behind him. And so what the New Orleans Saints did, and Tuttle was a big part of this, is that he stood up Jason Kelce, which is not easy to do, but he stands up Jason Kelce. That limits how much push that offensive line is able to get, particularly right at its center. And then you have Pete Werner and Demario Davis, who simply like anchor in, dig their heels in, get their hands on Gardner Minshew, and just leverage him backwards and everything. It was just one of those like fantastic plays that's never going to show up on a highlight reel. That's no one's probably ever going to talk about ever again after this. But it is one that, like, if you know football and if you appreciate football, not even if you know football, you don't really even have to know football, but if you appreciate sort of the nuances of football, that's a fantastic play, a fantastic moment, and a big moment for the New Orleans Saints defense, who again found another way to show you that they are or can be who we thought they would be going into this season. Another player that I think deserves a little bit of shine in this one is, of course, Rasheed Shaheed, right? 58-yard bomb down the right sideline, just absolutely cooked James Bradbury, who has been awesome for the Philadelphia Eagles so far this season. The Saints really tore apart that Philadelphia Eagles zone in the first half. They went 13 of 14. Andy Dalton did in the first half. The one incompletion being the interception that he threw, which was just a bad decision. Like, Juwan Johnson's wide open underneath. Don't go to the second level. And that's what we knew the New Orleans Saints were going to do. They were going to run those levels concepts over to the right side, force those conflict defenders, and you got exactly the look that you needed to just go to Juwan Johnson, who could turn around, pick up 5 yards for you, keep moving the ball down the field. You're at the end of the first half. Why are you pushing? It just doesn't make any sense. But maybe you just didn't see the defender or something like that. But in any case, they were tearing apart that Philadelphia Eagles zone early on in the game, and Rasheed Shaheed was a big-time benefactor of that. Over 70 yards in this one, 6 catches. I mean, he had a huge day. And that's just what we come to expect from Rasheed Shaheed now, which is wild because this was a guy that was on the practice squad for the majority of the beginning of the season. He was on the non-football injury list to start the year. People weren't even sure we were going to see him this year. And now all of a sudden, everybody's clamoring like, whoa, okay, wait, how do we hold on to this guy? Like, how do you keep him around in New Orleans? And thankfully, he's under contract again for next year, for 2023. He's an exclusive rights free agent after that, so he's not going anywhere. He'll then convert to a restricted free agent after that, depending upon the contract that he gets. So then he wouldn't be going anywhere, or he's already signed to a long-term deal anyway, so it doesn't matter. So Rasheed Shaheed, Chris Olave, Juwan Johnson, these guys, big time for the New Orleans Saints. And then I want to give a quick shout out to, I'm just going to say the New Orleans Saints special teams, but particularly the punting unit. In the second half, which is where the New Orleans Saints defense started to get like kind of torched the most, as Philly started to pick up more and more steam and kind of got their momentum going. Listen to here's the starting field position for the Philadelphia Eagles in each of their second half drives. They started on their own 9, their own 14, their own 4, their own 14 again, their own 41, their own 9, and then their own 25, which was the very last drive of the game. But still got 7 plays out of that. So out of those 7 drives, they started only 2 of them at better than their own 14. And a lot of that, and if you listen to it, when they started on their 9, kickoff coverage. When they started on their 14, both times they started on their 14, that was because of a punt. The time that they started on the 4, that was because of a punt and a JT Gray tap back and keeping it in what's the word I'm looking for? Keeping it in the field of play. When they started on their own 9, punt. And then that ended up turning into 2 plays later, the pick 6 for Marshon Lattimore. So, which Marshon Lattimore knew was coming because he saw the tendencies of what Philadelphia was running when they were in those situations, because they were so often in those situations. You take that and you look at the first half where they started their own 25, their own 10, their own 25, 25, 25 because of all the scoring that the Saints did in the first half. That's huge. That's a huge ability to be able to flip the field. And you see the advantage of being able to do that. Now, sometimes you get torched on a 78-yard touchdown when you have a team that starts on its own 4-yard line. Sometimes it bees like that. But for the most part, it don't bees like that. And this was absolute evidence of that. And shout out to the New Orleans Saints too, just kind of as a whole, like the penalty numbers in this game. The Philadelphia Eagles just went on just a meltdown at one point. False start. At one point, they had 3 false starts on 3 different players, all in the same possession. They had 8 penalties for 49 yards. The Saints, 3 penalties for 20 yards. Played a very clean game, very complimentary game. Almost a quarter's worth of time of possession went the Saints' way this time. 37 minutes and 4 seconds their way, 22 minutes and 56 seconds the Philadelphia Eagles way. So that's it. Like, that's the formula to winning, is like, don't shoot yourself in the foot. If you do, by throwing an interception at a goofy time, get the ball back at some point. The Saints did that. They put points on the board with their defense. They didn't shoot themselves in the foot with penalties. They dominated time of possession, and they converted, I think, like all 7 of their first downs in the first half. But outside of that, like, they limited Philadelphia to getting off the field. Like, they held them off the field. Philadelphia went for it twice on 4th down, failed both times. They went for it 12 times on 3rd down, only converted 3. That's the winning formula for the New Orleans Saints. And hopefully we'll get to see one more solid game of that against the Carolina Panthers. And then hopefully that's the foot that they start off on in 2023. Coming up tomorrow, it's Tuesday. So for our Tuesday episodes was when we'll be back. So for Tuesday, we'll dive into analytics to start things off. We'll take a look at coverage, a little bit more conversation around should Alontae Taylor be the starter next week opposite Marshon Lattimore. And then for our second show on our 2-a-days, we'll get to our mock draft as well. We'll take a look at some of those other potential places that Sean Payton could land and get you an updated mock draft based on some of the potential places that he could go. So we'll focus mostly on the 1st and 2nd rounds for that mock draft. Appreciate you as always for coming through and making me your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, for your second listen, go and check out Locked On Sports today. Get all the news that you need around the world of sports. Around 20 to 25 minutes, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with the Locked On local experts. Find that on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Appreciate you as always, making me a part of your day, part of your routine. As always, if you see me, say hi, and thank you for saying yes to me and the show. If you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter, Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.